All right, guys. I think it's time. Welcome to Beard of Darkness Book Reviews. Thank you for being here. I'm so happy to be talking with Christopher D. Brand. Finally, I've been chatting with him for a while and can't wait to dive into his book and can't really even more so wait to hear more about his inspirations. How are you tonight, Chris?
I'm good, sir. Thank you very much. It's,
Um,
uh, it's cool to actually be doing it. I think this is the first interview I've ever done.
I love the baby picture, man. It
It's
really awesome.
1985, I think. So we're getting a bit retro there, sort of dating myself.
That's awesome. I love it. You said it was a moped there that you're working on already, mechanic at what,
Yeah, I
3?
think so. That was my mum's moped, and my dad had a Honda motorcycle as well.
And yeah, so E.L. Montague is absolutely right. He is a trooper, guys. He's in the UK, so it's like 2 a.m. right now. Like, he is a beast. So we're very thankful he's here. John A. Douglas, mutual friend of ours.
Hey,
Uh,
the Orc Warlord himself.
the old Orkster. Uh, he says Brand has been a big supporter of his. Had to be here for him. Absolutely. It's part of that. By the way, guys, my green screen is being a real you know what tonight. And ask Chris, I messed with it for like 20 minutes before coming up here. Not that quite that long. I exaggerate, but long enough to where I just said, I'm done with it. If there's a little bit of green, it is what it is. But I digress. I'm happy you're here, Chris. I can't wait to hear more about your book, which is called
A Blade for Hire.
that's such a good title because I mean it just raises all these questions, right? Those are the best, I feel. So I can't wait to hear what are some. Well, first, tell us. We've got the title. Give us the genre and the blurb, if you would.
So the genre I normally call it is low fantasy. You were having a discussion with someone the other day about these kind of titles and what does that actually mean? Low fantasy, high fantasy. So I think a lot of people they sort of argue over does this thing fit this genre and so on. But really, low fantasy, we're just talking about the fact there's magic in the world. It's a fantasy world. But you don't have like wizards throwing fireballs at people and shit like that. Uh, and I describe it as a fantasy action thriller because it's kind of has some elements that you would expect out of, say, an action film or an action story, and also some thriller elements, but it's neither sort of one nor the other. And it
It,
basically just follows the story of this guy, Hale, who is a former soldier turned the eponymous Blade for Hire. And Hale is basically the answer to what would happen if we took like an NFL guy, a guy who's like 6'4" with a 40-inch standing vertical jump, and we gave that guy a great sword. We gave him a sword that had like a 4.5 foot long blade and just let him loose on the world. What would happen? And the answer most of the time is just carnage. And
I'm
so he's sent off. He's on this mission, and he's told, right, go to this place, meet these two priests, and they're going to give you a task. So he shows up, and on the face of it, it sounds really simple. You're just going to go from here to there. Our friend is missing. We've lost contact with him. We just need you to come with us and just keep us safe along the way. Then when we get there, help us find this person. So of course Hale's like, right, who's your friend? And they won't tell him. They just, you don't need to know. Just get us there, and that's it. Of course, immediately his bullshit meter goes flying off the scale, and he's trying to delve a little bit deeper in there. But in the end, the money's good. Sounds on the face of it, just go there. Shouldn't be too hard. And of course, immediately, like as soon as they go out there, as we say here in the UK, it all goes tits up.
It all goes tits up. I feel like I've heard that a few times. It makes sense. By the way, guys, the baby's having a little bit of a bellyache. If it gets too crazy, we'll take care of it then. I'll try to mute it as much as I can. She's got a little bit of a bellyache, but we press on. That's what we do here at Beard of Darkness Book Reviews. But I just want to say, just from you talking about it, I get this feeling. Tell me if I'm wrong. A feeling of Kill Bill. I see lots of carnage, and that's kind of what it reminds me of.
There is plenty of carnage along the way. Excuse me. I mean, we've got swords, we've got a bit of magic in there, we've got gunpowder in there, so we've got sort of like some muskets, things like that. lot of people often compare the novel. They mention Alexander Dumas and the Three Musketeers and things like that as like a comparison.
Wow.
So if people think along those sorts of lines, you're going to have battles like that with guns going off and sword fights, people jumping out of windows, this kind of stuff exploding. Quite a lot of carnage.
What do you pull those inspirations from? Like specifically, like growing up, we'll start at the beginning. Your inspirations for this novel first, and then we'll kind of go backwards a little bit after that.
So, I mean, I've always, like for a long time, I wanted to write. And one of the ideas that I came up, because I'm quite interested in the English Civil War, which is sort of the time-wise, that's the 1600s, the 1642 to 1646. And originally my plan was, I was thinking maybe I could write a novel set during the English Civil War. But it's one of those things where you sit down and you're researching it, and you have a character and he's standing around and he goes to walk along a field. And you sit down and you think, okay, what's in the field? What would be growing at that time of year in this time period? So you go off and you spend half an hour on Google looking at all this stuff. Great. Type it down. Keep moving a little bit. Okay, what does the house look like? Okay, what do houses look like? And then at the end of it, I was just like, you know what? Fuck this. It's just going to be way easier if I just turn this into a fantasy. Because I've read quite a lot of fantasy books. I just thought this might be a better way of doing this. And it gives you a little bit more freedom for the story.
Yeah, I think as somebody who's just literally beginning this process myself, like I find that because while I love fantasy and I prefer that, it also opens many doors. You know, when I first started thinking about Red, I was like, I have to be absolutely accurate to the very nth degree, or else people are going to say this or that. And man, I would never get anything done if I tried to write a nonfiction or like a historical fiction.
That is exactly what happened to me. I was just sitting there and I was thinking, right, do this, do that. And then there was a character took out a piece of paper. I sat there and I was like, wait a minute, do they have paper? Did they actually have, did ordinary people have paper? Rich people had paper, but did ordinary people have paper? Okay, well, what did he write on? Did they have pencils? Was it charcoal? And you realize that if you're going to do this, you really need to know, like if you're going to write a book set in a specific time period, you really need to know everything. You need to know like all the details, all the inner workings of it, right down to the, what people ate for breakfast and so on. Whereas with fantasy, you have so much liberty to just focus on the story and not worry so much about every last detail about, did they have tinder boxes and what do the tinder boxes look like? You can do that in fantasy. You can talk to the audience about that and put features like that in there. But you don't have to worry as much about that. You can just focus a bit more on the characters and just a bit more on the plot.
Yeah, I think I've heard very similar things from other fantasy authors too. It's like I have a lot of respect for. I was over here just trying to look for the book. I can't think of his name. He wrote The Wager. I think it's David Ragg, I believe. Anyway, it's nonfiction, but it's a great story that just sucks you in, and because it's real. I mean, this guy just so many sources, and bravo to somebody that can do that. Me, I feel like yes, David Grand. Thank you. Some Okie dude, my guy. Thank you for being here, man. And yes, he also did Killers of the Flower Moon. Yes, he did. Absolutely. But yeah, it's one of those guys. He just really impresses me. He's won numerous awards, and I get it. Like he puts this time in. It's just something I would never get anything done because I'd be obsessing over and over. Like, is this 100%? Because somebody's gonna call me on my shit. There's that guy everywhere.
Yeah. There's always that one person that's going to be like, oh, that's not how it worked. But you get that a lot with history. I've noticed a lot of people do this with historical things. They say, oh, did they have that in this time? This isn't true, so on. But then when you actually look into it, a lot of the times people don't know as much about history as they think they do. So you'll see these comments in the book saying, oh, this is unrealistic and that's unrealistic and so on. But then when you actually go into the details, you realize these people, some of them, they think they know more than they actually do.
Yeah.
It's like one of the things I have in this book is somebody getting wounded, and they're essentially doing what's called a thoracostomy, which is basically when you make an incision under somebody's rib, put a tube in like a chest drain.
Mm.
And I was talking to somebody about it, and I was like, "Oh, did they really have that though in that sort of time? Even though it's fantasy, it's a sort of analog." I mean, what we think of as a chest drain now was first talked about by Hippocrates, and that's 500 BC. So, sometimes these things where people, they're not sure whether it's historical or not. In a lot of cases, it actually is. It's just perhaps not as well known.
A new word that I learned when I started this channel, actually a little bit after I started, it took me a little while to kind of learn this word, and it's gatekeeping. And
Oh, yes.
I haven't personally dealt with this at all, but you have these people who are like, if you're going to write about this subject, you ought to know it, and I know it, and I'm going to teach you something. It's like, man, don't you've got somewhere to be, or like something to
better to do?
Yeah, man. Than to try to show me one, like it just doesn't.
It's like, if we're talking about inspirations, one of them was Bernard Cornwell, and he had a whole series of books following a character called Sharp all throughout the Napoleonic War, the Peninsular Campaign. So this is sort of early 1800s. And even he did a ton of research through his books. He had all the little details and things like this in there. And even then, still people would come along and be like, "Oh, actually, that's not how this worked, and actually, that's not how that worked."
Like,
so even this guy that's done this ton of research, looked into all these different, there's still little bits here and there that people caught and said, "Oh, that's not how that worked," and so on. So
like,
even some of the people that do the most research can't get away from it.
So, speaking of Bernard Cornwell, that's somebody who I would love to read eventually. I'm still so new to and just so excited to read a lot of these foundational books that a lot of these authors and buddies of mine on BookTube and a lot of these guys in the comments have read, that I'm excited to read for the first time. So I'll go maybe to historical fiction after I'm a little more content with my foundation in fantasy. I prefer it. It's just what I prefer. And but I listen to guys like Alan of the Library of Alexandria, or Alexandria, I think is how you say it. He's a smart guy. He's he's a teacher and he knows his stuff. And that's one of his favorite authors, I believe. And he just talks so highly about him and how there's a historical part, but there's also like this "what if this happened" type of fiction about it. So that just sounds fun to me.
Because he's done that. He's done the whole Sharp series, which is, like I say, it's like Sharp is like this character that's he's like an infantryman. He's like a specialist rifleman, and progressively as he goes through this, there's a whole book series that just follows them all the way through Portugal, Spain, into France, all that whole Peninsular Campaign. And as he's moving up the ranks from book to book. But then he did a series set in the American Civil War, and he has actually done some fantasy stuff. And at one point when it was only a couple of months after my book first came out, I actually got into the top 100 fantasy in the UK on Amazon.
That's
and
amazing.
There was my book sat next to, I think it was called The Winter King or something like that, by Bernard Cornwell. So I just quickly grabbed the screenshot and I posted this everywhere, showing everyone, look.
That's a moment, man. That's amazing. Congrats on that. Because I would have been like, everybody look at this right now. Like, this is my time, y'all.
It's just crazy. Like, you grow up reading these people's books, and like they made the Sharp thing into a TV series here in the UK. So a whole bunch of these 2-hour episodes. So I've known all about this, and then just to log in one day and it says, "Oh, you're number 99 or whatever in UK fantasy." Click on it. There you are, sat next to Bernard Cornwell. It's like, oh shit.
you get to have that memory now forever, man. You'll never forget that, and that's special, dude. Congrats on that, and that's amazing. I would absolutely feel the same way. And I like what Timothy said. Somebody critiqued Panacea, which is by Alex. Oh my gosh, I feel terrible. He sent me a book from freaking France, dude. An omnibus that weighs like 6 pounds. He
Jesus.
sent it from France. It was like $50 or something
I
crazy.
was to say the shipping
And
on that. Fucking hell.
yeah, dude. It was. I interviewed him on my birthday, and he's like,
Hmm.
"Hey, by the way, this is your birthday present from France." And I said, "Are you kidding me, dude?" Like, and I got it in the mail really quick too. I was like, "Oh, I'll get that in a month." Got it in like a week. So amazing dude. And Alex Robbins, that's it. Yes, he's such a good dude, and he's fun to talk to. You guys should check out his books. He's got a lot of books out there. War of the 12, I believe, is his main series, and then he's got Panacea, if that's how you say it, and then there's 2 more to that trilogy. But I can't wait to dive into that omnibus. It's huge. It's the biggest book I own. It's bigger than all my hardbacks. It's a paperback, but it's an omnibus, and it's like, dude,
So just
it's
all one
huge.
book, just a whole bunch of stories all crammed into one.
And it's got 2 extra short stories in it, so just that much bigger. So yeah. Anyway, I think that's hilarious because, like he said, there's a big ass minotaur on it. Come on, people.
Yeah.
Those are fake, people. That is not historical. I mean, that's not a nonfiction, guys. There's no need to correct him.
I mean, I think there's kind of a difference. What was it David V. Stewart said? He said something along the lines of, it's not necessarily realism, it's believability. I think as long as you have that, as long as people can read it and they sort of, so you have, it might be characters sitting around there eating at a table, as long as they're not, sitting there reading like off their iPhones or something like that when they're supposed to be in some sort of medieval land.
I like
as long as you
that.
don't go to the extreme, as long as it's sort of believable, most people will kind of tolerate it.
Repeat that quote again.
Which about the was it not so much?
It's not reality, but
not realism, but believability.
Oh, that's deep. That's so true, and it's so simple yet just gets that message across. I love that.
Because even when you're dealing with things like magic and so on, and the effects of magic, obviously that's not realistic, but there's an element of, and the same thing with superheroes. Superheroes are not real. There's no real Superman, but I think people like it when there's a sort of an element where they can sort of buy into it, and it's consistency. That's
if somebody said that he's throwing if somebody's like he throws a fireball at this guy and he turns into ice, that's not believable, right?
Yeah.
I get that. That's cool. And Montague, I love what he says. Internal consistency is the key. You have to be true to your story and your word or your world. If you've written multiple books, which is why I think I'm an outliner, because I hear about these guys. I know Stephen King is obviously the one that people talk about, but I've talked to John Palladino, who's a pantser. Now, is that what you do?
So I've been on a journey with all this. So the first book I did basically like that. I had a very, very basic outline. The outline was pretty much man with big sword goes to place, things die along the way. That was basically the outline of the book.
Man, sword die.
Yeah, man with sword cuts things up. And so I started going along, and it was mainly just writing, like we have all these terms for it, pantsing and discovery writing, and was it George R.R. Martin calls it gardening.
Yeah.
So I was sort of going like that. But at the same time, as you start to tell that story, you start to make notes as you go along the way. And this is why I'm a believer that I'm not actually sure there's a huge difference between planning and pantsing. I think really it's sort of 2 sides of the same coin. Both people are doing the same thing. They're both going in the same direction, but they're just doing it perhaps by different paths. So one group will sit down and write everything in enormous detail, but they still have to think about it. They still have to think about, well, this will go here and then that'll go there and so on. Whereas if you're pantsing, you're still doing the same thing. You're still putting the story together, but you're just doing it while you write and while you're with the characters. One of the advantages of that is that the characters tend to lead the story, because when you put them into a situation, you're thinking, right, well, what goes next? Excuse me. What goes next? What do they do next? Think about like a movie like Die Hard. If you were pantsing that, what does John McClane? So he's just watched Takagi, the chief executive, get shot in the head. What does he do next? And his first thought is, right, I'm going to go and get help. I'm going to go and pull the fire alarm. I'm going to try and pick up a phone, call somebody. So we have a character-led story. That the characters can help you put the story together in a way that's a little bit more logical, because you're thinking about what would this character do in this situation, as opposed to, well, here's my story, here's the sequence of things that I need to happen, and the characters have to they have to go over here. It doesn't make sense for them to go over here, but they have to go over here just because that's what the story needs them to do. This is how you end up with lines like somehow Palpatine returned, from that Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
Because they have it all planned out and it doesn't necessarily make sense, but they have to go that way because that's the way they've decided the story is going to go.
I think you're exactly right. And I think at first, for me personally, I got too caught up in like, what am I to be even giving me like that creative freedom? I think the part that I'm not good at, as far as trying to just write and not write anything down and plan ahead or know my characters or my plot or anything like that and write that down for me to see, is I lose the cohesive writing part. Like it just, I go to the next day and I'm like, where did I leave off? And once you're at page 400, I'm like, I can't reread that every single day.
Because I had that same problem in that. What can happen if you're halfway through a chapter, particularly if you're writing big chapters, you're halfway through a chapter, you've written 1,500 words, you stop, you say, right, I'll come back to this tomorrow. You come back to it tomorrow. You maybe read a little bit of what you've written, start again. And what ends up happening when you read it back later is it becomes disjointed because you have a chapter that's essentially been written in 3 different sessions. So particularly if it's dialogue, if it's 2 characters having a conversation, because you had part of the conversation and then they've stopped and you've come back to now you're essentially starting almost a new conversation because you've kind of lost that feel of where they were and what it was, not so much what they were talking about, but the way they were talking about it. And this is one of the things when you go back and you reread your drafts, you really notice this. You can almost, at times, pinpoint the places in the chapter where, okay, that's where I must have put this down and gone off because I can see that this thing is different from this section. And for me, it evolved over time. So that first book I did, Pantsing, I ended up having to rewrite the final third of the book, essentially, not because it was bad, but it was just looking at it and looking at some of the characters. Like there was one character that originally was left behind who in the actual book goes along for the journey, and just moving those pieces around afterwards. But then when I tried to do the second draft, I tried to do the opposite. I tried to have a really big plan. Everything was all laid out. It was all detailed, just the complete opposite of Pantsing. And it fell apart after about 40,000 words because it was that problem of the story needed the characters to go here and do this and then go here and do this. But when you were actually writing, and when I actually came to writing the interactions between particular characters, it just didn't make any sense. It just didn't piece together properly. So that went to one side. Oh, sorry.
No. Absolutely. Sometimes it's hard to tell over the lag or whatever. If I interrupt you, I apologize. I think what I was just thinking is I never realized, I heard it a lot because I talked to a lot of authors, but not doing it myself until a little while after starting my channel and talking to authors, like that. Being cohesive for me is the hardest part because, like you said, if you end a chapter with this frame of mind, with these characters talking this way, and you pick up the next day, I think it just comes down to really knowing your process personally, because nobody's going to have that exact same process. And I didn't stress enough as to, I don't know, like how specific that might be.
Because I mean, what I've moved on to now, because I did a second draft of that story, and that I ended up writing 90,000 words, and I was just reading it back, and it was fine, but wasn't great. It wasn't brilliant. So I ended up putting that aside. And then when I went to do the third draft, I was essentially starting in a completely new direction, but I tried something different in that I wrote an outline that was basically one small paragraph per chapter. So it was a kind of hybrid between an outline. So I had a plan. This is what's going to happen. We're going here, then we're going there, then we're going there, and so on. But it wasn't detailed. It still left me room within each chapter to have the characters talk and have the characters figure things out. And it gave me a bit more leeway and a bit more room to sort of deviate off the path and then come back to it a little bit later. And I think that's helped me. And like the project that I was working on during NaNoWriMo, I did something completely different, just a completely different story. I did that the same way. I had an outline, just short paragraphs, pretty much for each chapter, just kind of pointing me in the right sort of almost like waypoints. Like, we're going to here, eventually we'll go over here, then eventually we'll go here, and then that'll take us around to where we need to go. I
And
found that gave me the combination of having a plan, having an overarching idea of where we're going, knowing where the ending's going, but also giving me the freedom to move things around and shuffle things inside the story.
You've really helped me right there. I've been listening to that, and that makes perfect sense. And I think I'm going to have to be a lot like that. I feel like I can relate with that a whole lot. And HC Newell, thank you for popping in. It's so wonderful to always see you pop in. So thank you for being here. And she says, Timmy. And if you know how that if you grew up in the 90s, we all know what that's from. And absolutely. Of course, my rendition of it's terrible, but you guys get the gist. Anyway, thank you for popping in. Yeah, so I'm glad you touched on that. I do apologize about that. Just don't die on us. So I like going into those specifics with people because it gives you a real snapshot as far as, somebody can say, I'm a pantser, I'm an outliner, but does that really tell you anything when it comes down to it? Somebody ignorant to, not in a negative connotation, just ignorant to the writing process, maybe like, oh, that's telling. Well, when it really comes down to it, for me, it's not. There's just a deeper part to that.
Especially as like when we talk about the trouble, we've got 3 different words: pantsing, discovery, writing, gardening, to describe that same process. That tells you how poorly defined that is. And what's pantsing for one person and discovery writing for somebody else? It might involve different levels of detail. So one person might have just a very vague idea, literally one sentence, one paragraph that says, this is roughly where I'm going, and then ta-da, and away we go. Whereas somebody else might have perhaps a page outline, and it's not really, you can't really call that planning. It's one page, it's not a detailed plan. Whereas for some other person, they'll say, right, for them, planning means having a whole fucking whiteboard covered in post-it notes, and they know every character's eye color and
sounds
the last time they had
to
a shave and all this kind of stuff. And I don't know how people do that. It's just
the last shaved on the 5th of November. Yeah, that shit would bug me. Like, it's too much work. Not that I'm being lazy, but just too much confusion. I mean,
so I can understand sometimes knowing the world and knowing the characters and having all the details like that can be useful, because even if it's stuff that's not necessarily, the audience doesn't necessarily see it, because you know what it is, it can help you with the planning. But it just seems to come a point where, do you really need to know what the character's favorite breakfast is? Do we really need to know?
Over like easy eggs.
Yeah, for James Bond, it makes sense that we know what his favorite drink is, because he spends so much time at the bar because the guy's a giant pisshead. But like, do we really need to know, like, every other character what their favorite drink is and things? I just think sometimes detail like that, it almost becomes a form of procrastination, where you're sitting around planning all this stuff, and you're convincing yourself that you're planning for the book, but really you're just sort of using up time.
I think the perfect medium for me, and I hope I get there, and I'm not trying to rush it, but at the same time, I feel a little impatient. But I think it's somewhere in the middle where I know where I'm going. I've got the basics, the skeleton, if you will, written down. And then I also have that creative freedom to go with in the middle of those points where I want.
Yeah. See, that's the thing. I think as long as you've got the rough, I mean, really, just for a story, all you really need is 3 acts. Just act 1, introduce the main characters, and introduce the basic premise of the story. Act 2, the promise of the premise. That's the best way I've heard it described. So if it's a romance novel, this is where they go off, they go on dates, fall in love. If it's an action novel, this is where a bunch of people get shot and die in car crashes and all this kind of stuff, and jump out of airplanes. Then Act 3, just a climax, and then the denouement, the falling action at the end, where everybody talks about what's just happened and so on. And kind of as long as you've got those points, that'll push them in the right direction.
I like that. I really do. I'm glad we went kind of deep into that because it's personally, maybe I'm being selfish, but that was personally very helpful to me. I hope a lot of you got that same experience from it, because it's nice to hear that somebody, had that same issue with completely pantsing or completely outlining. I think I'm somewhere in the middle. So we've talked about your writing process a little bit, as far as, well, what we was just talking about. But do you have, say you're right in the middle of grinding away, you write every day, or do you write every day? What is that process? Do you have a word limit?
I try and write pretty much every day. I normally don't. I don't have a hard word limit, but I'm always thinking minimum of about 1,000, and as much as I can get. I think most days I end up probably doing sort of 2,000 to 3,000. Like one thing I
Wow.
tried during NaNoWriMo, there's an author called Caro Brown. She has a YouTube channel. She was doing writing sprints, which was basically just 20 minutes, smash out the words, go for it, a short 5-minute break, and then another 20-minute period on the other side of that. Again, just smash it, just no sound. She has like a sort of background noise, but no music or anything, and just focus on the writing. And I found that during that I was able to do about 1,000 words an hour, near enough doing that. And that really helped me, that kind of, because in the past I've been a bit slow and I sort of type and I stop and I look at things. But doing it that way, focusing on just write, because the main thing is really the first draft, not worrying so much about. One of the things you have to do is get away from this idea of everything has to be perfect, every line has to be perfect, every piece of dialogue. Is that the exact perfect way to say that? Is this the exact perfect way to describe the vines growing up the front of the car? Who gives a shit? Just get the story down on the first draft. That's the main thing, is just to get the bulk of it down. And then I think it was Neil Gaiman, I'm going to bastardize a quote by Neil Gaiman, who said that the art of the second draft is about making it look like you knew what you were doing all along.
I like that.
Because that's really the key. This is sort of the dirty secret of writing books, writing screenplays. If you listen to people who, there's a bunch of these things on YouTube, lectures of people talking about screenwriting, and experienced screenplay writers talking about their methods. Basically, everybody has this same thing. It's not the first draft. It's the second draft, the third draft, the fourth draft. Because this is pretty much what they do in Hollywood. You have someone write screenplay, sell it to a producer. The very first thing the producer does, picks it up. Oh, this is amazing. What a great screenplay. Calls up someone they know who they have on retainer, sends them the screenplay. Right, I want you to rewrite that for me. I like the characters. I like the idea, but it's not it's not a Hollywood screenplay. Turn that into a Hollywood screenplay for me. So
Wow.
that'll come back. They'll get a director in to work on the project. Director will pick it up. Oh, this is amazing. This is brilliant. I love this character. But it's lacking this, that, and the other. They'll send it away. They'll have somebody else write it again. And that's the kind of, like I said, that's the dirty secret of writing. It's not getting everything done perfectly the first time. First time around, you can afford to have dialogue that doesn't quite, it's not that it's bad. You shouldn't just sort of just slap any old crap on paper. But you just don't worry about too much about the exact details of what somebody's saying, or the exact details if it's like a fight scene, the exact details of where everyone's standing. It doesn't really matter. What matters is the overall story. You get that down in the first draft, you read it back, and normally that's the problem we were talking about earlier, where stuff becomes disjointed, where you're writing and then you come away and then you come back to it and the next day and so on. You pick that up when you're reading it back. And that's where the second draft and the third draft and so on is more important, because that's where you get the chance to actually read it the way a reader would. And then that's when you get the chance to sit down like I did. I've just been reading back. I finished my third draft. I read through that. I've now started on the fourth draft of the sequel. And in my notes for that, I had this bit. Oh, that's a great chapter. I love that. Oh, this is brilliant. You had a string of chapters together where I thought they were really greatly blended really well together. There's some of the chapters I've just put, this is utter shit. Throw this in the bin, because some of the chapters just won't work. And that's where the trick comes in from the second draft and the third draft is, okay, we'll take the shit bits, we'll throw them in the bin, and then we'll find a better way to link these together. We'll go through the chapters that are good. How can I tweak these? Maybe chuck some bits of the dialogue out to make it run a bit smoother. But it's the redrafting is really where the story comes alive, and that's where the magic happens.
I'm so glad to hear you say that too, because out of all the advice that I've talked to authors about, like yourself, that piece, what you just said, I think is not only the hardest to hear, understand, and accept, and then do. Because I think as we're writing, especially for the very first time, we think, oh, this has to be perfect grammatically and all that.
Yeah.
And at least I did.
Yeah.
And I'm going back and like fixing words. And it's like, look, get that gist down. If you can do that, if you can like give yourself that you're not tie yourself down so much, get it down. You know what you're going to be talking about. That second and third draft, you can really make things pretty. But get the basic cohesive story down and go from there. I feel like that's going to be a huge part that makes me say, oh, this is for me.
What you just said there about it being difficult to learn how to, it is. It's difficult. The difficult part is it's not knowing it. It's internalizing it. It's being able to actually do it when you sit down and write. Because you're always looking at what you've just written and think, oh, could I write that better? And then you just have to kind of teach yourself not to worry about it. It doesn't matter now. It's none of this stuff is going to be seen by anybody until you click publish. So it doesn't matter if the dialogue's not exactly perfect. It doesn't matter if the description of the bloody tapestry hanging above the fire is perfect, because we can fix that later. What we need to do with the first draft is get all the pieces on the chessboard, and then we can piss about with moving them around and setting them up and checkmate.
It's like that KISS rule, right? Keep it simple, stupid, and then go back. And then I like that, man. I really do, and I like that you touched on that. And by the way, Soul Freak Wolf, man, you're never late, you're never early, you are right on time, anytime, brother. And if you're writing, dude, that is amazing. I've read some of his short stories. They're really good. I'm very excited for him to keep doing that. So do your thing, man. Scrivener, I hear good things. For Christmas this year, one of my good buddies got me the Campfire software. Manuscript. And I'm digging it. I am. I know for the guys that have been writing in Word or typewriters and stuff are like, oh, you new sons of, but that's just how we go. If it's fancier, we want to try, right? And there's elements. So the manuscript element is what I have like a lifetime, unlimited amount of space to write in. You can do that with like characters and plots and stuff. But I think manuscript is really basically the same as Word. You can just like organize it a little easier, which I like.
I mean, my process is basically Word. Underneath where I'm writing, I have my word count on what page I'm on in the chapter, and then just chaos underneath that, just a chaos collection of notes. I've got fucking documents all over my desktop with there's notes in this file over here about something that's going to happen in 4 books time, and then the rest of that story is in another file over the other side, along with what's going to happen in the 3rd book, and so on. And it's just a complete mess of just shit everywhere.
But it makes sense to you, right?
Exactly, 100%. I know you asked me something, I know exactly what document it's in.
Well, that's all that matters, right? And
until I forget.
Right.
I forget where everything is, and I'm like, shit, where was this? I'm going to go to documents.
It's like that beautiful chaos. And then there's also a point where that beautiful chaos becomes, oh shit, that's really chaos. And now I kind of forget what I did with things. Like I need to reorganize that chaos. That's get
where
it.
I am.
Love it. And that works. It works for me. It sounds like it works for you. So that's great, man. Who are some of those authors? So first, when did you find your love for, whether it was reading or writing or literature, just period?
So when I was back in school, when I was a little kid, I used to read a lot, but we didn't have a lot of money. So most of the reading I did, it would be going to the library, taking books out, bringing them home. So this is the trouble. I can't even remember half the stuff that I read because most of it I was just reading and then it would go back. I read a load of sci-fi as a kid. I just remember that. I can't even remember, like, say some of the names of some of the stuff, but I used to read a ton of sci-fi, and I'd love to write sci-fi at some point. And this basically went all the way through into high school. I put an acknowledgement in my book for a guy called David Chester, who was my English teacher, who really tried to encourage me to write and was really supportive of that. But then after I left school, I don't know, it all just kind of fell off. It was only a couple of years back now that I really sort of got that bug back to, okay, everybody talks about writing novels. Maybe I should write a novel. I think I could be good at this. We'll see. I sort of started trying, and I was starting to like plan and things like this. And then I saw a bunch of videos by a guy called David V. Stewart, who he did a whole bunch of write streams talking about, like, okay, if you want to self-publish, here's what you do. You do this, you format your document like this, then you go to Amazon, you click this button, you upload that thing to there. And that's the kind of thing that made me really sit there and go, wait a minute, I can actually, I don't have to worry about doing this and then sending it to publish and stuff. I could just go straight to Amazon and just, it'll be out there, and it'll be out there in the world, and we'll see how it goes.
I think that it's, I've talked to a couple guys. One that comes to mind is Brian D. Anderson, and he has dabbled in being traditionally published as well as, and this is his own words, an OG indie author. Back when it was like, what's that? He was doing it. And he talks about the pros and cons of then and now. And it's the accessibility. There's the good parts of that and then bad, right? I think that anybody that finishes a novel, man, that's Brandon Sanderson talks about it in one of his lectures. It's like most people that start a novel never finishes. So just to finish that is a huge accomplishment. But, this is funny. I don't really even know where I was going with that, but I just really liked that point. I think anybody that, you're talking about indie publishing, and I like hearing that now it's more accessible because say 30 years ago, you wanted to write a book. It just wasn't possible for you to be on something huge like Amazon. And now if you market yourself, you put in that work, things fall in line, you can be a successful author. And that's fairly new.
Because the thing, I see people and they say, you see like hashtags I'm querying. So the people that have been querying agents. And in some cases, they've been doing it for years and they've sent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters. And obviously, some people just want to do it that way. They want to do it the TradPub way. But it's nice that we have the option that if somebody's querying and it's not working out, they just keep getting told no. They have that option available to them to just say, well, screw all these people. I'm just going to do it through Amazon. And it really is easy. It's really just a case of filling out a few forms. You have your document, you format it the right way, pop it on there, and away you go. And all of a sudden your book is out there for people to buy.
Yeah, that's incredible. So Free Wolf has a question. He says, do you copyright first, then Amazon, or is it part of the Amazon process?
I mean, as soon as you write something, as soon as you publish it, you own the copyright. Well, in fact, as soon as you write it down, basically, you, in theory, own the copyright, as long as you can prove when you did it. But like, if you just go to Amazon, you've got your document, you upload it, you put your cover on there and so on. As soon as you publish it, that's it. Yeah, you own the copyright to it completely. You own the full rights to it. And it's only a case of if you decide later on that you want to trade that away, which is essentially people who are trad published. In most cases, that's what they're doing. They're essentially signing the copyright of their story over to the publisher.
I've had a couple people on my channel, only one that I can remember that actually did it. Gaurav Mohanty wrote Sons of Darkness. He started as an indie author and then got picked up. It's right in front of me, actually. Wow, how convenient. This one. And he ended up getting published by Head of Zeus. But he didn't really go into the pros and the cons of, now that I am a published author, what does that mean as far as what Soul Free Wolf was talking about, the copyrights, right?
Mm. Damien Buckley made a good point. In the old days, the poor man's copyright was to mail yourself a copy. Yeah, because then you had the proof. You had the proof of the stamp, whether it would go through the post office and they would stamp it with a date. So you had proof, dated proof of when you had sent yourself the book. So if somebody
Wow.
argued, you could just show up with the manuscript inside the envelope still with proof
That's
of when it
incredible.
happened.
And that's a little tidbit of knowledge that people wouldn't know today. Like, it's cool sharing that, Damien and Chris. It's fun thing to hear because, again, it's not something you have to do now. So it's kind of lost.
Yeah, I mean now it's just the computer. When you type it and you save it, the computer has a copy of that, and it can tell you the last time you made an edit. It can show exactly the time when you made a
Wow.
change to a document, exactly when you saved it, and so on. So you don't even really need to do that sort of thing now because you've got the digital paper trail of what
Still
you've
a
done.
valid option.
Yeah, still a valid option.
So even today, sending yourself a copy of the first manuscript.
Yeah, I suppose because you could print out, you could take it from the computer, you could print it out. It doesn't have to be formatted. It just, as long as you've got it on paper, shove it in an envelope, mail it to yourself, make sure it goes to the post office or wherever, gets properly stamped and comes back to you. You just leave it in there and you've got it. You've got the proof that I wrote this story.
I wonder how many indie authors were like, how important is that? And then their book just skyrockets, right? And they didn't take the time to make those things necessary. Then you'd really be hurting. Am I right? Or is that realistic?
I mean, I think as long as you can prove when you wrote it, which again, the digital copy should be enough to do that.
Gotcha.
Because the second you produce it, basically you own the copyright to it. So that, in most cases, that should be enough.
Corey,
you can order a proof. That's another way of doing it. Or you can order proofs from Amazon.
proofs are so cool. I remember one of the very first books an author sent me, David T. List, who wrote Violence and Vigilance, another guy that I do the Beardsman of Bookpocalypse. Wow, brain fart. It's funny. He sent me, he's like, hey, I'm ordering my proofs. So I'll just send you one. I ended up getting his proof before him. And he was like, send me pictures, man. I felt so bad, right? But they're cool because, it's just not for resale and you feel all special and shit. So I think that's cool, Corey. And you're never late either, brother. I was telling Soul Free Wolf, he said the same thing. You're always on time. I always appreciate you being here. By the way, somebody who has put in a lot of work as far as redoing like covers, and as far as I can see, Corey, man, I've seen the lists that you've been selling on and stuff. That's got to be so cool. Like, if you wouldn't mind, Corey, put your artist in the comments because I think she did a fantastic job of redoing your covers. So congrats, brother. But that's such good information. It's stuff like that you just don't think of. For example, for me to ask, I haven't done it, so it doesn't pose a question to me. So to hear that and be ahead of that game is nice.
And part of the problem is it's just not one of those things either when people are talking. So, for example, when they're talking on Twitter, people are talking about books and so on. It's just normally copyright's not something that really comes up. We probably should tell people, like, if you're really worried about copyright, you need to go and speak to an actual proper copyright lawyer. Don't listen to two people on the internet.
Absolutely.
Take that as your.
Thank you for saying
people
that.
on the internet told me that I had copyright.
Beard of Darkness. He really, sent me for a woozy.
Yeah, Beard of Darkness told me that as long as I did this, I was okay.
I thought he had no hair, no brains, though. I just didn't know. No, thank you for saying that. That's a great point, and absolutely. Your boy is not a lawyer, and I'm so happy that would be very stressful on me.
He has a conscience. He has morals.
I've had lawyers, so I know what they do. So like I said, I love those little tidbits. I know you said it's hard for you to remember, like maybe some individual books that you read. Who are some of those authors, though? Like who are like, I would pick this guy's book or that girl's book before maybe another.
It's just the thing. I mean, most of this was back. I mean, we're talking what's that, 30 years ago,
Sure.
because most of it was just like I don't think I own a book so about 20 years ago,
Mm,
because all of it was just basically me going to the library,
I love
bring
that.
home a haul of book, read them, take them back, right, give me more books, different
Are you a
books.
hoarder now, though?
I'm a semi-hoarder now. I
Oh,
have a
I'm
lot of
full.
non-fiction books because I was a
Oh, wow.
bouncer years ago, so I have a bunch of books all about fucking judo and aikido and all this other stupid shit.
When this
Most of
guy
which,
drunk comes to like karate chop me, how can I flip him upside down with more leverage? Like that.
I've got a bunch of all that. But one thing I've been doing like the last couple of years, like ever since I wrote my book, is buying. I basically almost exclusively now buy indie fantasy books. Pretty much, wouldn't not necessarily just specifically fantasy, but indie books, because there's just so many different stories. There's just so
Yeah.
many different ways. And I started reading after I'd written the book. I started reading Game of Thrones. That was fine, it's not bad. I can understand the appeal, but the trouble is all the characters I like keep dying.
Yeah.
And if you
I've
just,
heard that.
and I'm looking at it thinking, if you could just take like Jon Snow's bit of the story, and maybe whatever his name is, Sam, that because I haven't read the last of the ones that's published.
I've read the first one.
None of us will get to read
Yeah.
the last book because it's never going to happen, because George R. R. Martin has completely given up on it by the looks of it.
Well, he's got the money to where he's like, I just don't, need to.
Yeah, he can just work on what he wants. But that's the trouble with the book, because I'm a believer that the characters are more important than the plot. You can tell a fairly boring story, but with really interesting characters. But how many times do you ever see someone go like, "Oh, the characters are boring and I didn't really care about them, but the plot was really interesting"?
You're right.
You almost never see that. And the trouble with Game of Thrones is, it's like Daenerys. I don't give a shit what happens to Daenerys. I just don't care. She's not interesting to me. You've got Tyrion, who's supposed to be this great master strategist, but you never really see much evidence of it. Don't really care about Tyrion. It's like half the characters. Then Jaime, don't give a shit about Jaime. Cersei, don't care what happens to Cersei. So this is the trouble. I've got like most of the way into the series, all the people that interested me, most of them are gone, with the exception of like one or two. And the stories focus around now the characters that I don't care about. So I've got to fallen off of that.
I've heard that same thing. Now, again, I've only read the first book, but it's like I almost just, because I know it's not going to give. Of course, nobody knows that, but there's a good chance that there's no such thing as an ending for that. That's a huge possibility. And not only that, it's like I've heard the exact same story. All these characters that you learn to love, he just kills them.
Yeah.
And there's other authors who do similar thing. I've heard the same thing about Robin Hobb. But I feel like, I don't know, I just can't invest like 6 or 7 books of that in every single book. Like, oh, I like this guy, but he's dead now. Let's see if somebody else comes along.
Was that the trouble? You had trying to think the character's name, Rob Stark, and I was like, this is really cool. Like this young man, he's leading the army, and the pressure's on him, and he's going back and forth. He's the underdog, and I was really getting into it. I was like, oh, this guy. And then the Red Wedding happened, and they all fucking died, and I'm like, well, fuck.
Yeah.
So there goes that character that I enjoyed.
All my hopes and dreams, George R. R. Martin, you just squashed. You shoved him down the toilet and flushed him twice.
I mean, I understand killing characters, like, without giving away spoilers, not everybody makes it to the end of A Blade for Hire. But when it's like a central character, and particularly when you're doing it over the course of several books, it was just kind of weird that so much time was spent building Rob up, and he looked like he was going to be one of those sort of, like he was going to be one of the real protagonists, core protagonists of the story, and then just
George is a cruel guy, it sounds like. It's like, this guy's, he spent all these books like talking this guy up just to kill him. I just don't like him no more.
But Ryan's question there, I can't imagine how hard it is for George as a pantser. I'm still not convinced he's a pantser. I wonder if this is one of those things, what we were talking about earlier, where what he thinks is a gardener and what I think is a gardener and what somebody else thinks is a gardener is all completely different. Because how is the story is that interwoven and he's got all the details and so on. It seems difficult to me that he is doing that all off the top of his head. I wonder if he's, I mean, it might be that he spent years planning all the background story and all the background characters and the families and the family histories and so on, and the, you know, who's got what emblem on their bloody
Yeah.
tabards and so on, and then try
Well,
to pants it from there. But I don't know. I do wonder if a lot of it is kind of, he actually does have an idea, but
does
he's
he have
just
a
sort of,
different definition of pantsing, right?
yeah.
And you know, it's something to back that up from somebody. Like I said, I've only read the first book, and I don't know a lot about his process. I seen an interview between him, George R. R. Martin, and Stephen King, and the whole time he's just like, "Stephen, how do you write so fast?" And I'm sure Stephen's over there thinking, like, "George, how do you write so slow?"
Yeah.
We supposedly do the same thing, right?
Because
So
even
yeah,
like, even a book that's 300,000 words. So if you write 1,000 words a day, you can write a 365,000 word book in a year. So what the fuck is George doing? Like 12 years. Like,
right.
I
And
know
and
he's
that's
been
not.
working on other projects and so on, but
Yeah, I see a lot of blurbs by him, like going through Walmart. It's like, oh, George R. R. Martin spent a lot of time reading a lot of books, and doesn't sound like he's writing too much. Not that I'm judging. I am nothing. I'm zero. I'm zilch. This guy's done it
yeah,
and
but
done
he's
it better
laughing
than most.
right now from his golden throne. He's got his
Yeah.
golden toilet. He's sitting there watching this on his with his golden iPhone, laughing as he just throws money in the air.
Eating his chicken wings and shit, counting his money and shit.
They
on
can
the
bitch
beach.
all they want. I don't care.
Raked up a lot of money. I
Another
did.
6 chapters describing people eating meals out of bread loaves, trenches for everybody. It's like a fucking episode of MasterChef.
There it is. Although like I said, just it's all jokes. I got a lot of respect for anybody that does that kind of thing. At the same time, though, I don't envy him at all, because I'm sure there's a mental part to that. Like, so many people, whether you aim to write it or aim to not write it, and whether he knows that or not, it's like, man, that guy's got a lot of weight on his shoulders, and I don't envy that. But
So this is one of the problems I've been having with my sequel, because essentially I'm on the 4th draft, but that's really the 3rd version of it, because I got some really terrible writing advice very early on, which was, I was looking at things like looking for advice on writing sequels, and somebody gave me this enormously terrible piece of advice. Oh, don't read the first book, because it'll don't read back your first book, because it'll sort of warp the way you think about it. You need to start fresh, and, you know, all this other sort of esoteric bollocks that they were telling me. And it messed it up. I was sitting there and I was like, why isn't this story working? And eventually I did. I just went back and read the first book, and it made perfect sense. I was like, okay, because these two stories don't mix together properly. And if I'd have just gone and read the first book, it would have been much better. It would have worked much better from the beginning. So when I did the 3rd draft, because I'd read the first book again, that was much easier for me to sort of put the pieces in place.
now what you have to do is, that person that gave you that advice, you have to poop in a brown paper bag and light that on fire on their front porch. And then you watch them stamp it up.
Make sure I get the record of it.
Right.
But genuinely, I've looked at so much, and I'm constantly doing this. I'm constantly trying to find, you know, more advice, better ways of doing things. The vast majority of writing advice that's out there is horseshit. Most of it is it's people's preferences and their personal, so what they like or what they dislike, thinly veiled as writing advice. You see this kind of thing all the way on Twitter, people saying you should never do this. You know, like we were just joking about George R. R. Martin and the food. Oh, you don't need to write the whole, you know, passage about what somebody had for dinner. Well, George R. R. Martin he'll sit there and he'll spend 3 pages describing what type of meats and veg are on the table. And people will say, oh, you should never do this and that, so on, because it's terrible. And you'll have J.K. Rowling out there who's selling, you know, sold millions and millions and millions of books, and she's got all the fucking money in the world from the Harry Potter series and all this kind of stuff. And she's doing the things that everybody's saying, you know, all the writing advice is saying, oh, never do this. This is terrible. But she's doing it, you know, Brandon Sanderson, the amount of things people will complain about. Then someone else will be like, well, you know, Brandon Sanderson does that all the time in his books.
Mm.
So a lot of this advice that's out there, a lot of it is just rubbish. It's just shite. It's just people giving their opinion, things they like, things they don't like, and then dressing it up as writing advice.
So it's
Families and
personal.
giving advice.
It's more personal, maybe like, okay, this worked for that person. And maybe they shouldn't say that this is a defining rule. This is what worked for me. Try it out. If it doesn't work for you, maybe there's an exception. Just, I think we kind of touched a little bit. Maybe what I'm saying is wrong. Again, like very new to all this. But in my head, it's very individual. It seems like. I feel like there's no one piece that I've heard from an author that exactly applies to me. It's just a discovery mission, right? You're discovering what works for you. And I think take a little bit of that advice with a grain of salt that somebody's definite about, and say, well, maybe that's just for them.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is, it's just, the main thing is the reader. Does it work for the reader? Now, the trouble is that books are subjective. People like different things and so on. You know, even the Super Bowl is the most popular cultural event in the United States every single year. Only about a third of people watch it. If you were to go out the next day and stop someone, average person in the street, did you watch the Super Bowl? Not only are they more likely to say no than yes, they're twice as likely to say no than yes. So even
Yeah.
something that's enormously popular is still more unpopular than it is popular. But so somehow we have to kind of find an audience of people who like what we're doing. And I just think like a lot of this stuff where people are saying, oh, never do this, never do that. It really is. It's just what their personal taste is. Really, you should be sitting down and thinking like, you know, people keep telling me don't do this, don't write this way and so on. Like dialogue tags, people are always bitching about dialogue tags. But in some cases, dialogue tags work really well because they can save you from having to type 2 or 3 sentences describing somebody's mood and so on, if you can just nail it with one tag. And I just think things like that, it's for me, when I'm reading it back, what I'm looking at is not so much the rules. Oh, you should do this and you shouldn't do that and so on. What I'm trying to do is get that story so that it reads nice and smoothly for the reader, because that's the thing that's most important to me.
I think that's a great point. And one that I was going to make real quick is anybody in the US that's in the comments, Chris is a huge American football fan, and 2 a.m. is nothing to him because he likes Monday Night Football. What, Thursday Night Football, as you said, Tuesday, Thursday?
Yeah, you get
Friday?
Sunday Night Football.
Sunday, yeah.
I unironically think Sunday Night Football is my favorite thing on television because I love the way that NBC, I love the way they clip when they go back and forth in the commercials and they clip in the little pictures from the city that they're in. So you get a real feel. It's not just the game. You get the real feel of the city, you know, whether it's Houston or Philadelphia or, you know, Washington and so on. So you get, particularly for someone like me, because I'm in the UK. So, you know, you see all the big city lights and you see like the sidewalks and all this kind of thing. The way it's, you know, the particularity of a US city versus, say, a UK city.
You're hitting a
cool
point.
Seeing all that.
You're hitting a point that I've really learned that I thoroughly love and enjoy by talking to not just authors, but people, man. I would have never, not just because, I don't know, maybe I didn't think that US football was a big thing in the UK. So to hear that is very cool to me. It's a culture thing. Just like soccer is the predominant sport in the UK. Am I right or wrong? Or is it rugby?
Yeah, by quite some margin.
Okay. And I just think that's cool. I don't know. Maybe I'm weird, but I think that's very cool that you're into American football. And I have to say, I agree with you. I played it for quite some time, and my necks and my knees and my back hurt from it. But I have to say that there is 2 manlier sports out there, guys. Well, excluding like chainsaw, like those ones where they climb.
Sculpting,
yeah. Rugby and hockey, man. Hockey, if you spend enough time in the NFL, you have no teeth. Your dentition is null and void. And rugby, those guys just, man, those are men. But American football is fun. I miss it. Friday Night Lights. But anyway, I just find that culture is something alongside the author. The reason I'm here, I've also found that to love in, people as well. So thanks for sharing that. And RH Snow, I think, makes a good point. She says, yes, always read your own work. I read my own series at least once a year. I think that may be good because, again, it's personal. But if you're familiar with your work, I feel like there's a point where if you don't refresh yourself, you're going to forget certain key aspects potentially.
That is exactly what happened to me, because I could remember the main points of the story. But when I read it back and I was reading it, and you get these little, it's mainly the little details. It's kind of like how if you read somebody else's book, you read it, you get the general story, general idea, general characters, and then you read it again and you start getting into all you pick up things that you missed the first time, and then you read it again and the same thing happens. You pick up, even more, sort of drill down, the more the little details. It's the same thing that happens with your own book, is if you don't read it back, sometimes you'll just forget, like, it might be just something like a throwaway line that a character said, or not necessarily a throwaway line, but something that's on the face of it seems not that important, but it has a link to the ending of the book. It has a link to the next book, because it could be something that just like a small comment that somebody's made, but it's about something important. And just if you don't read the first book, you forget all these things. You forget, like, oh yeah, shit, that character said that. That's why that happened, and so on like this. So highly, highly recommend, if you're writing sequels and so on, first thing you need to do is go back and read what you've already written. Ideally, go along and make notes while you're doing it as well.
I love that. First, real quick, Corey, thank you, man, for popping in. Always love when you're here. And again, you're always on time. And yes, 5 a.m. comes early. He's a construction guy. Get that sleep, brother. You got kids. Do your thing, man.
I can't salute him because I'm not on camera. But if I talk, then the little band will move. And that's me saying, thank you, Corey.
Yes. Amazing. 2 people thanking you. I love it, man. Go get some sleep, brother. And then, Ryan, don't forget about esports. Peak masculine energy, brother.
Oh yeah. God, I played FIFA at one point. I played what was that, FIFA 23? It's the first FIFA game that I've played in like 20 years, and it was fucking terrible. It was awful. I genuinely don't understand how people can play like competitive, because it was just so ridiculous, and just the lengths that people would go to win just on a computer game.
Yeah.
And I was only playing like 6 months, and already I was starting to get quite handy in it. And it's just the amount of time you have to dedicate to things like that. Just
the lack of sunlight on your skin does quite a bit to the physique and the skin tone. And that's not even like, it is funny, but at the same time, like, I respect it. Don't get me wrong. Maybe I don't. I don't know. I think that anybody that dedicates a lot of time to something, whatever, you must love it. But at the same time, man, you need to go, like, maybe jog or toss a football or something every now and then.
Well, I mean, some of them earn quite good money now, though. Like some of them with their sponsorships, they're only crazy money. They're tens and tens of thousands of dollars each year just to sit around and play fucking Fortnite and stuff like this.
Yeah. I guess more power to you. I don't know. I don't really know what to say on that. It's like maybe, it would be nice to have the money, but I just don't think I could sit in a room that long. Like, I love video games. Don't get me. I've spent lots of my life playing video games, but that's a whole nother level. To each their own, right? Yeah. And Ryan says first Fortnite tournament was 16-year-old who won $1 million. That's 6 zeros, guys.
$1 million for playing Fortnite. I need to buy.
There's certain jokes I just don't make. Like,
fuck this writing. I'm gonna get a PlayStation and learn how to play Fortnite.
Sometimes I feel like my jokes sometimes would be a little too much, so I don't go there. I love my channel and I love the people that come together, and it's like I would never risk that for some stupid joke. But man, I love that. I love how far you went into your writing process. And not only that, the comments that we've got, they've been very helpful to me, and I'm sure if they're helpful to me, so many others. So what are you working on right now?
So at the minute I'm on that 4th draft of the book, which is really the second draft of the version that I'm on. And then at the same time, I'm also trying to finish off that NaNoWriMo thing that I was doing, because I think I'm sort of about 2/3 of the way through it. I think I might be able to get that done in time for the Spiffbo this year, which is Spiffbo
Yeah.
10. I noticed somebody put that online the other day on Twitter, and it's the hashtag is Spiffbox, which I think is
Oh
kind of
wow.
cool. So I might be able to get it done for that. But it's the main thing is just that getting this, because it's been 2 years now. It was December the 7th. I only found this out the other day. It's 2 years since I've put that first book out. But I wanted to make this. See, the trouble is, one of the reasons it was taking so long is because I wanted to make sure it's right. Because you get this thing with Hollywood and the television where they just pump these crappy sequels out because it's just they have to get it done. But I wanted it to be good.
Yeah,
To be really good.
that's respectful.
So that's the thing, is like I didn't want to just, I could have taken that second version that I had, the second draft. That was 90,000 words. I could have just put like a fashioned an ending for it, checked it over, done a bit of work on it, and maybe pumped it out, and that would have been that. But it was fine, but it wasn't the right story. It wasn't like a really cracking follow-up. There is a bit of pressure. I've had some lovely things said about the first book. Some of the the Goodreads, you read the comments on Goodreads and on Amazon reviews that people are left. It's awesome, some of the things. And like, I had a guy contact me on Facebook saying he was on an airplane. He was finishing my book. He was sitting on this airplane. He said, like, I went on a bit of an emotional journey for an hour or two, and all these people on the airplane were looking at him like, what the fuck's wrong with that guy? Like, he's sitting there with his Kindle. And that's the thing, is like that. I want to make sure that the book reaches that standard. I want to make sure that people, who have taken that time to read the first book and review it and who enjoyed it, I want to make sure that I actually give those people something that they deserve, because they've taken a chance on me. They've spent money on my book, and I want to make sure I don't take the piss, basically, and just be like, oh, here's some shitty book that I wrote in a couple of months and just pumped out. I want to make sure that it's actually like a really good book that people are going to enjoy, that people are going to read it and be like, wow, that was a really good follow-up to the first story. That really met the expectations and so on.
And that's super. I have to just say, as a person and man to man, I honestly feel like that is special. Okay. I feel like that's respectful. I think you put a lot of worth and a lot of your passion in what you're doing. And you've said a lot of great things. And I have to say that's amongst them. When it comes to welding, the guy that's going to take that extra little time to make sure his craft is honed to where he wants to be the best at it and not let anybody down, I think that is very respectful. But that's the cover, guys. It's beautiful. I love black and white covers. The font is bold. It says, hey, I'm here to kick some ass. So there it is, guys, and it's beautiful.
There is that's the second version. There was an original version, like who was it you interviewed? Andrews Wizardly Reads.
Mm-hmm.
And he bought it. He bought the very first version of the book where the A Blade for Hire bit was up in the top and my name was at the bottom. Well, obviously they don't make those anymore. I think they printed like a couple, because it's print on demand. So as soon as I changed that cover, that's it. The old ones stopped making them. So, maybe one day in the future, 10 years from now, that book will be worth a whole $1 extra because it has a different cover.
I hope so. I really hope so, man. That would be amazing. And not only that, like, I just sense that you do this for, well, I think that you love it. You talk a lot about the ins and outs of it in a very intimate way, a personal way that you've learned. But you also talk about doing it right, which I think is very respectable again. So I admire that.
Because I think stories, I love when you tell a really good story. I think that's awesome. When you can really capture people. Like, those are my favorite reviews, is when somebody puts in there and says the way it made them felt, or it moved them, or something, along those lines. Because that's when storytelling is really at its best, when it really, not just a fun story, but it actually gets into people and it sticks with them for a while. It's something they remember and something that they kind of really have a strong connection with, whether it's a book or a film or a particular TV show or something. That's storytelling at its best.
I've heard so many authors that I've talked to just, and it's wonderful. They get to that 50th review or that 100th review. I have to say, I'm really impressed, man. You've got 133 reviews on Amazon and a 4.1, dude. That is amazing. And 63 on Goodreads. I think that's incredible, dude.
The weird thing about that though is on the UK one, it shows 136 ratings. I don't know why. I don't know why Amazon does this. So the UK one and the US one they're different. They're off by 3 ratings. I have no idea why.
We're gonna have to contact HR on that one. So what's going on? My guy deserves that extra 3 count, and it means a lot, dude. I can understand like
reviews are the absolute critical thing. Like if you look at like again, if you look at like a lot of the booktubing and TikTok and all that kind of stuff, when people review the books, that's huge. And then when people go to Amazon, particularly if you're doing advertising or if it's just somebody going through Amazon looking at the pages, they see your book. If they see a book with say 15 reviews, there's that element where somebody sits there and goes, yeah, do I really want to buy that? It's well reviewed, but it's only 15 reviews, Whereas if a book has 150 reviews and it's still got, a 4.2 or whatever, that gives people a lot more confidence to know that, okay, a whole bunch of people have read that and enjoyed it. So I'm more likely to have a good experience out of that than I am out of the one with 15 reviews.
I tell you, I think you're right in that. And I wish it wasn't so, because there's been, arcs that I've gotten that I've done reviews for before there was a single review. And it's like, man, I can't imagine not reading that and just being so floored by it. So it's a false notion, but it is there. So I get that. I do.
That's the trouble. It's just that building the confidence of people to take the chance on your book. This is one of the reasons why the fact that a lot of indie books are doing really well is huge for indie books in general, because it's giving people a lot more confidence now that, okay, when they see that a book is self-published, it doesn't have that same stigma that it had perhaps, I don't know, 5-10 years ago. People are a lot more, because there's so many good indie books coming out and telling all these brilliant different stories of all these different subjects and people going in all kinds of different directions, which is awesome. Like my favorite book that I read last year was Murder at Spindle Manor by Morgan Stang.
Yeah,
which is like a Gaslamp fantasy type book.
Love those.
It's also a murder mystery. It was awesome. I got about, because originally, like the first part of the book, because it's a murder mystery and a fantasy, there's a period where the author has to kind of put the pieces on the board and get everything set. But then you get to about probably like a third of the way, halfway into it, when the first murder happens, and the book just takes over. I remember I sat down one night, I was like, oh, just read for an hour. 6.5 hours later, I finished that book because I just read it all in one go. It was amazing. And it's just, I can't imagine that story being published by a traditional publisher.
Yeah.
Not for adults. Maybe like as a kid's book, if they told them like, oh, okay, change all these bunch of elements and tone it down and so on.
And they would.
But I'm not sure if like a trad publisher would actually have taken a chance on something like that.
I feel like you and I have a lot in common as far as, well, I just heard that you like Gaslamp fantasy. So I have to say I'm odd. I'm doing things different than the booktuber norm. I'm about to do my best reads of 2023 and talk about my January reads either tomorrow or the next. I'll have that video finished. And I have to spoil one of them. And it is a SPFB 09 finalist, Jacqueline Hagan, who wrote the Wickwire Watch. And I'm telling you, dude, just based off what you just said, you will die loving that book, man. Serious. It is amazing. It is just like what it's a Gaslamp Victorian London feel with like a murder mystery plot. It's great. You should check it out. Wickwire Watch by Jacqueline Hagan.
Because I was still looking at because I'm getting ready to order a series of books, like my sort of Christmas present to myself. So I might have to go back and sneakily chuck that in the basket
Yeah.
Somehow squeeze it in there, get it on the side.
It's worth it's a debut novel too, and you're like, I don't even get how somebody just starts writing this way, you know? But it's great. You'll love it. I know it. So sometimes this answer is different, so I'm still going to ask it. Is what you're working on and what's next two different things? Is there anything coming up for you that you didn't chat about?
I'm trying to think now. So it's just mainly those two projects, which hopefully I can get them out. Hoping to get them out sort of fairly soon within the next couple of months. The main thing I'm trying to do is get the sequel to A Blade for Hire. That's the one I want to get sort of first, and then the other book that I'm working on. But I mean, I've got a whole stack of story ideas now that I'm gradually sort of working on and sort of developing this idea. And because I want to write something, I want to write sci-fi. I want to write a steampunk thing, a gas lamp maybe, because I want to try different things. I don't want to just do. I'll have that book series, but I want to do other things as well. I want to try different genres and different styles because it's a challenge as a writer to can I do this? Can I do this? That other book that I'm writing is whereas A Blade for Hire is you've got swearing and people getting carved open and all this kind of stuff. The other book is kind of a YA novel, more like a dad and his three girls. It's something a bit out of my wheelhouse, and I'm trying to, because I'm doing it because it's almost like just a way of testing yourself and pushing yourself as a writer to try and develop. And because if I can do this and I can do that, and if I can write a sci-fi and do this and write maybe a horror in the future or something like that, then the more different things you try, the more skills you'll have, and hopefully it'll make all your stories better. And now that I'm starting to get the hang of what works for me in terms of planning and my writing system, this idea of having my sort of general guide it's not too loose, but it's not too restrictive, and then just sort of sitting there and getting this idea down of, okay, let's just get the first draft, let's hammer the first draft, let's get that done, and then I can review it, and that's where I can, because you don't know if a story's going to be any good as you've actually written it. And then once you've written it, that's when you can figure out, okay, this bit works, that bit maybe not so much. Hopefully this year, that's one of the things I want to do this year, is not just these two books, but see if I can pump out, if I can get maybe a third or even a fourth out there, if I can really grind and figure my system out and test it, push it, and see how much I can squeeze out of it.
It never fails. That's why I always follow up with the same kind of question, like, what are you working on, and then what's next for you? Because I always get that little bit extra with that. And you gave it to me. It's that ambitious part of your brain that says, what am I really about to get into? What do I really want to say I'm getting? Because that it digs deeper, and you totally fulfilled it. I'm very happy to hear that. I love to hear the ambition of creativity, man. It's something I never thought that I would grow to value again. In fact, I don't know if I ever did value it. I found reading and the want to write late. When I was 29, I'm 33. So I just like to hear those type of answers. It inspires me. So thank you for kind of digging a little deeper and giving us that answer.
Because once you've got the bug of doing it, that's where it becomes, because now you sort of develop that passion for telling the stories because you love hearing people's responses to it. That's my favorite part of being a writer, is hearing people saying, oh, they read this and they love this element, or they love that particular, this piece really hit them, quite hard for whatever reason. And that then just sort of triggers you to want to do, okay, more stories, more, I want to hit more people in the fields, make more people cry.
Yes. That's what I'm aiming to do, by the way. I want to read that book that makes me like just cry. I haven't found that book yet. Of course, like I said, I haven't been reading very long. I've read quite a few books. I mean, a couple hundred books, but it's not very many compared to most avid readers who've been doing this since childhood. And I think I'll find it one day, right?
I don't imagine so. There's got to be something out there, because again, it was come back to personal preference. What might be really interesting is maybe that book that you're talking about, maybe that book is your book, the book that you wanted to write. Maybe you'll find that once you get into that and you start getting that down on paper and you start developing that character and fleshing them out and finding out what it is they get up to and the journey they go on. Maybe that will be the book that you've been looking for, the book that really kind of connects with you in a strong way.
I like that. I like that a lot, man. And I feel like that's very honest, and I can see that happening because, again, it's one of the things that just blinded me. I'll tell you the most honest part is I didn't read until I got really sick. Okay, I spent like a few years in the hospital and had some stuff going on, and I couldn't take those physical adventures no more.
Yeah.
So I decided to take those mental adventures, and I'll tell you, I'm so glad I did. And now that I'm healthy again, it just is even better. So I feel like you're right. I feel like that's exactly where I'm headed. And thank you for
It's also
talking
a polite way of saying, fucking get on with it.
Yeah.
Write your book.
Yeah, thank
I know
you.
you were saying the other day you weren't sure about where to start. And I think the main thing you need to do is just start. Just start somewhere. Think about if it was a movie. So imagine it's,
Ooh,
because you were saying about the Norse and so on. So imagine, the music is playing, it's the drums and the horns or whatever. It's like the opening to Conan, except instead of being the guy sitting on the mountain telling, Crum is your god and he lives in the earth. What is your story? What would that first scene be of that film with those characters you want to tell? And
I dig
where
that.
are we going with them? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I hope you're happy to hear this. And I've actually made that first step, and I've
Hey.
hit that spot where I'm like, I think I'm ready to kind of. I was just thinking most of the time, right? I was just sitting thinking, not getting anything done.
Yep.
And finally, I'm writing now. So I will absolutely keep talk to you about where I'm headed with that, because, man, it's so helpful to
Man. I mean,
have
if you
that
want to,
voice.
anytime you want, you can hit me up on the Twitter DMs, etc. You have my email now, so yeah, if you ever want to pick my brains about something, then by all means, go ahead.
I sure will. But man, I just have to say, I really appreciate all the different aspects you went into, just kind of telling your story and what you're influenced by, and the things that you've done and that you fixed, and your passions. I love that. Thank you, Jim. Jim,
Hey.
man, he's been a wonderful supporter too. He's phrased something that me and my wife's a graphic designer. One day he's just like, fear the beard. My wife's making a t-shirt design right now, and we're gonna bust that open. I'm gonna send one to him when it's made.
I hope Jim's a cut of the getting a cut of the commission from that.
Oh, he will, for sure. He's getting some free shirts. He's getting like at least 90%, right?
He's gonna hit you with a copyright claim for the
I came up with that,
I mailed a version of that thing to myself.
Exactly. Love it, man. Thank you, Jim, for being here. He is. I love those kind of people. There's so many of them over here, and I just appreciate you all. Is there any? I hope that you have a few people that you'd recommend I speak with in the future.
I have. So,
yeah,
I anticipate this question coming, so I've got a handful of names here. So Quimby Olsen, who.
Ooh, 1 second. I ain't got my paper yet. 1 second.
Oh,
I came unprepared. All right, I'm ready.
So I got Quimby Olsen, maybe, who's done. She's written a bunch of like cozy fantasy novels with dragons.
Yes,
I'm curious because I haven't read any of these sort of cozy fantasy stories. I'm just curious, kind of, what goes into that, like, because that seems like a challenge to me as well. Like an interesting challenge to write a story that doesn't have some obvious conflict of, fight battle with person and things like that. I'm fascinated by that idea of how do you create conflict without having that ability to butt heads and so on.
I agree.
Then we got Kenneth Cromwell. I was going to say R.H. Snow, but I think haven't you already got it lined up?
Yeah, in the next couple of days. Forgive me for not remembering the exact date. I believe the 5th.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, in a few days. Yeah. So yes.
Oh, awesome.
Great.
So I don't have to wait long for that.
What was Kenneth's name?
Kenneth Cromwell. And then you've got so someone like David V. Stewart, who he has a channel on YouTube, and that's the thing where I came across, and he was doing the Right Stream, and he was talking all about how to get started in self-pub on Amazon, and he does that. I think pretty much every year he does right stream, because he does sort of other content as well. I just think he might be an interesting person to talk about. He's published a number of books. Dito
Yes.
Abbott. So the spelling of the Dito is Dito. But so he wrote a book called Debunked, which is, imagine like a Saturday morning cartoon series, like a wacky, really, really wacky series, but condensed down into a book. Just a book full of absolute cheerful madness. It's
All
brilliant.
right.
It's a great little book. Has a great guy. And that guy but you want to talk about someone who does marketing. So he goes out to all kinds of different book shows and fairs. He's got 3D printed models of the characters from his stories. You check out his timeline on Twitter. He's got like because he has like airships in the story. So he's made like whole models of the airships and things like that. Yeah. And he
Ditto
takes him
Abbott.
along. Yeah. And he takes him along to his like when he goes to do book fairs and things like that. So he's got this massive, he has all these pictures of these massive displays of all this thing that he's done, where he's got his airships and he's got all these models and these hand wrapped books and that. And it's just brilliant, the amount of effort he's going into. But the book itself is really good. It's just really good fun. There's Sheila Young, because if you're going to get cancelled off YouTube, do it in style. I think Sheila Young, I just think she would be a good interview for someone. There's Rebecca Crunden, she's written a number of books. She reads mainly sort of novellas and the like, but she runs the Indie Book Spotlight. Thing on Twitter. She's juggling writing and PhD and all kinds of things.
That's impressive.
You've got Eric Wagg, Citadel of Seven Swords.
Yes.
I think he might be an interesting person to chat to. And then Sia Evelyn, who's the spelling of that. Sorry, Sia Evelyn. So the spelling is Silja, and then Evelyn is the surname, because she's from Finland, lives in Scotland. You possibly need a translator.
That sounds right up my alley.
But she's great. Like, I talked to her quite a bit on Twitter. Have you written anything today? No. Have you written anything today? No. We should probably start writing things.
Like, let's kick each other's asses real quick so we can get to work.
But she might have an interesting story for people as well, in the sense that, so she was trad published, but the publisher wasn't really pushing the book and so on. So she then had to fight to get the copyright back from the publisher, to get the rights to the book back again. So that might be, I don't know, that might be something. Yeah, that might be something interesting, because people were asking earlier about copyright and so on.
Yes.
And I think she's got like 5 books in the works.
Wow.
Possibly to come out this year.
Those are excellent, man. You really, you came up with good selling points for me, particularly because I'm always looking for those names I haven't heard. There's a couple that I've heard of, but most of those sound very interesting. So thank you for sharing those. And well, most of all, I just want to thank you, man. This has been just a wonderful conversation. It's been telling. It's given me lots of what's the word? Aspirations to find my deal farther than I have already, and just to get it done, right? To get those words on paper, if you will. And I know I want to, and that process is starting, and you've just even drove that home a little farther for me.
Because that is the main thing. It's just getting the words on the page, get that first draft written, so then you can read it back and then say to yourself, okay, good, bad, and then from there develop that story. But it's just getting that first version out. As soon as you get that done, everything becomes a lot easier.
I'm very excited, man.
You can do it. You can.
Thank you. I honestly, I appreciate that, and it takes people saying that. I think that's very genuine, very much so. So appreciate that, and it inspires me. So, man, thank you for letting me borrow you. I know it's late for you. Get some sleep, man, and I appreciate everybody that was live. We've always got this wonderful this company with me and whoever I'm speaking with, and we've had great company tonight. And we will definitely chat on the channel again. I can't wait to have you back. And Ryan, I will do that, man. I never thought about that. Never did. I like that. It keeps me accountable for
I was gonna
myself.
say that might be it. That's the word I was looking for when I was talking about See Your Evelyn, is accountability, going back and forth with one another. I think that helps as well, having somebody who kind of prods you every now and again and says, you know, are you doing the writing? Are you doing your words?
And
Why
I
not?
I have one person that does that. E.L. Montague does that. And now I know Ryan's in there. So I appreciate that, Ryan. He's in my Discord. By the way, I'll send you the link if you do Discord, Chris.
Yeah, go on.
Cool. Again, I appreciate you. I appreciate you guys that were here live. And for you guys that are watching in the future, again, I appreciate you. And until tomorrow, I'm talking with, I always do this. Like, I could absolutely rehearse a million times.
Meantime, that gives everyone watching a chance to run over to the like button. Click the like button. Click subscribe. What's the other thing? The notification bell.
Ring that bell, baby.
I've heard something about that with comments. That's apparently the big thing now with YouTube, is if you're leaving comments. That's the thing that really plugs the videos and pushes them up in the algorithm.
Yeah, Damien, by the way, there is a Discord. It's in the description. If for some reason, every now and then they'll give me like an invite code that expires. If it's expired, just message me on my Twitter or anything like that, and I'll give you the updated one. I never know when they expire, so it's always usually when somebody goes to be invited that happens. So we can fix that if it does happen. And I'm talking to Justin Doyle tomorrow. He's a sci-fi writer, and I believe I'm 99% sure he worked for NASA. So it's going to be a really cool conversation. I see him doing really big things, and it's going to be fun. So I hope you guys are there. And again, thank you guys for being here, and we will see you next time. Chris, thank you a lot.